Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week, the termite inspector came to our house. And the very first thing he told me when he walked in the door is that our policy shows that we are underinsured. You're shocked, right, that he would tell me this? And he starts telling me about how bad termites can be in the state of Texas. And he said that in a 1-acre radius, there could be up to 7 million termites. And he's watching my eyes get bigger. He says, oh yeah, and those Formosa termites, if they get in your house, they can eat a whole wall within 2 months. And then I came to my senses and said, well, I'll check out your website for more information. But it really is, it is amazing how quickly a house can tumble. And we read about just such a house in our Parsha this week. And I think that it can be read as a metaphor for communal living. Now, before I get into the sermon, I want to reassure you, I am not saying that this house is rotten and falling apart and dying. That is not the message of this sermon. But I think there are some interesting metaphors and imagery that we can play with to examine the complexities of communal life together. But before we can talk about the metaphorical level, we need to read it on the most simple level. So if you'll open with me to page 664, the very top of the page of 664. When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land you possess, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying something like, a plague has appeared on my house. And the priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague, so that nothing in the house may become impure. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. Well, it goes on to tell us, after this family has had to clear out all of their things, that the priest will shut it down if he finds red or green mold growing. And after 7 days, he'll come back to see if the mold is spreading or if it seems to be contained. And if it's spreading, you have to start pulling the stones that are infected out of the house and then putting in clean new stones. And then after doing what any practical person would do if they found mold in the house, which is get rid of the moldy part, there's also a spiritual reconciliation, and there is a ritual that the priest does with 2 birds. One gets to live and be set free. The other is slaughtered, as usually happens to animals in Jewish rituals. So what does this all have to do with a community? Well, to begin with, the text says, when you enter the land I gave you, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house. Well, if God is inflicting something, that's usually a punishment for some sort of behavior. And the sources, the Midrash, tries to interpret what is it that Sarat is a punishment for, this house mold. And one thing they suggest is selfishness, another is jealousy, and then the last one is gossip. Communal living. Not in my Girl Scout troop, not in my dormitory life, not in any working environment, not in my family, not with my neighbors, have I ever experienced or exhibited any form of jealousy, gossip, or selfishness. I can see why they picked these 3, but some of it actually is directly related to the text. Let's take selfishness. One of the things the text tells us is, before the priest will come into your house to evaluate the situation, the priest asks that you bring everything out of your house. So selfish people, they don't like to share. So what better way for everyone to see what your resources are than to make you take them all out of your house, right? Didn't I ask if I could borrow your hammer last week and you said you didn't have one? What's that over there? So I can see why the rabbis made a connection to selfishness and sarat, house mold. Then there's jealousy. One word for jealousy in Hebrew is tsarut ayin. Can you hear the similarity in the Hebrew? Tzarut ayin literally means a narrowing of the eye, right? It's the only thing I can focus on is the thing that other person has that I don't have. So the reason they said tzarat and tzarut ayin, they were making a word play. And finally, gossip. Motzei shem ra. Motzei is to make something go out, and a shem ra is a bad name. So to make someone's name go out badly is a way of saying gossip in Hebrew. And there are similar letters in Motzei shem ra'a and tzara'at. All right, that was the rabbi's interpretation. Now I want to play with the text a little bit. It was interesting to me to note the color of the house mold mentioned, red and green. And I'm going to have to digress a minute to tell you a story. When I was in rabbinical school, I was teaching a 5th grade class Hebrew in Santa Monica. And I decided to color code some of the words in order to make it easier to understand a grammatical point. So the main word was green and the suffix was red. And one of the best boys in the class at the Skill of Hebrew was really struggling with this lesson. And the 3rd week in a row that I was trying to make this point, he raised his hand and he said, "Mrs. Zelony, what colors are you using on the board?" And I said, "Red and green." And he said, "I'm colorblind." And the boy next to him said, "Me too." So we figured out that puzzle together. But I think it's interesting that those colors were specifically chosen in our parsha because mold comes in lots of beautiful colors. And I think there might be a message that sometimes the homeowner is somewhat blind to the problem. They don't know how to fix it, so they have to go and ask for help. They ask the priest for help. So if we're playing with this as an image, who is the priest in a community suffering from tzarat? Well, I'd like to tell you that it's the rabbi, but she is a fallible human being. So sometimes it is the rabbi who can help with a difficulty in the community, but sometimes she's not so good at it. Maybe it's the president of the congregation or the chair of a committee because they are leaders. Well, yes, sometimes, but sometimes they're also jealous or gossipy or any of those things that human beings are, even though we try hard not to be. Maybe the priest in this analogy is the wisest, kindest, most gentle person in the entire community, except that he or she too also might not be able to solve the problem should their own human infallibilities get in the way. I think the point is that we take turns being the priest when there's trouble in the community. And I like that message because as an individual trying to deal with tzarat in our house, I don't know if I can always help, but certainly as a community, one or the other of us can help the others find healing. And then finally, there's this spiritual routine after the mold has been cleared with the birds. There's one that does get sacrificed, but another is set free in an open space. Jacob Milgram points this out as important because the symbolism of setting the bird free is that you're letting it go. So finally, some of the imagery in this is that you're not supposed to hold on to the tzarat, right? You're not supposed to say, but 20 years ago you said, You're not supposed to hold a grudge in terms of creating a healthy house together. You let the bird free. Now, there was a midrash that Rashi brought to explain why would God bring tzarat upon us? Why would we be inflicted? Why do we have to go through the sufferings that all communal living sometimes brings about? And he says that it tells us when you enter the land of Canaan. In other words, when you get to the promised land, you're going to occupy the houses of the previous tenants of the land. Now, I know, right? That's a whole different sermon about us going into the land and taking over someone's house. So gloss over it with me for a moment so I can get to the point I want to make for this sermon, which is they get into these houses, and the people who left the houses for the conquering Israelites hid their gold in the walls, perhaps to come back for it later. And so when tzarat erupts, when tension erupts in the community, and you have to tear out the stones, By the way, the stones are not individual bad people. The stones are the miscommunications, the tension, the difference of opinions, right? Not the people themselves. So you're tearing out the stones, and what you reveal underneath is precious. What you reveal underneath is the gold. And sometimes a community has to move through a period of tzarat, of tension, in order to get to the gold hidden underneath. So my hope for us this week, should we encounter any jealousy or gossip in our community, is that we ask ourselves if we can be the priest in this scenario. Can we be the one that is a rodef shalom, the one who brings and pursues peace? Can we ask ourselves, can I let go of the bird in this scenario? Can I not bear a grudge? Shabbat shalom.